India number 5, Vantika Agrawal, and very talented youngster takes on Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru is the second seed at the Qatar Masters 2023 and he is playing with the black pieces. We are ready to go. Vantika with white opens the game with 1d4. The time control is 90 minutes for 40 moves and 30 minutes increment after move 40 with 30-second increment per move. Hikaru plays his knight out to f6. Vantika goes c4. Now Vantika's playing style is very classical. She loves to play strong, solid openings, controlling the center. She brings her knight out, and one of the openings that is her absolute favorite is the Catalan, which she's going to try to play here against one of the best in the world, Hikaru Nakamura. g3 played, and Hikaru goes to b4 with a check. And one of the ideas of this move is to provoke the bishop to come to d2 and then later drop back to e7. That's what Hikaru does. He brings his bishop back, claiming that the bishop on d2 is slightly misplaced here. Vantika puts her bishop on g2 now, and Hikaru just... Ooh, he goes knight e4. I was wondering if he would castle here, but knight e4 hasn't been played in too many games. But this is an idea of Richard Rapport actually, to take this bishop. Vantika is well prepared. She plays queen to c2, and she says to Hikaru that if you want to waste another move and take the bishop, you are most welcome to do so. It will help me in my development, and later I can break in the center with e4. And with this move, she gets up from her chair. Hikaru quickly blitzes it out, c6. He still has 1 hour 32 minutes on hand and very well prepared. Vantika now decides to simply castle it out, brings her king to safety. How is Hikaru going to continue next is the question. So after short castles, Hikaru will most likely castle as well. No, he goes knight to d7. He finishes his development. But one of the problem for Hikaru is the bishop on c8. It's not at all active, and maybe it could come out via this diagonal later on. Knight comes out to c3, and Vantika is hoping that Hikaru would take here. Then she could take with the knight and play e4, but instead Hikaru makes his knight on e4 into a strong point in his position, and also gets this stone wall structure on the board with f5. Very interesting move. Now how does Vantika continue here is a question. One very interesting move is to go bishop f4, but instead she takes on e4. That's a very committal decision. She's taken on e4, and now Hikaru can take with the f pawn as well as d pawn. He decides to take with the f pawn, which is very logical because next move he can short castle and his rook already has an open file. Vantika can now bring her knight back to e1 and later break in the center with f3, but instead she goes knight to e5, a logical move, putting her knight on the center of the board. Now Hikaru can take the knight because this knight is very strong in the center, and could then attack the pawn on e5. So he takes it, knight takes on e5, and Vantika takes back with her pawn, d takes e5. Now this pawn could become a strength as well as a weakness. You can't immediately win it in any way. For example, if you try to go queen c7 and attack this, always f4 is possible, and after takes you can take back with the rook, and this one e4 comes up. It's not safe to win this pawn. So for the time being, Hikaru simply castles. He's not really going after this pawn, and Vantika now has to decide how is she continuing this. She brings her rook to d1. That's a very good place for the rook because it's the open file, and also notice that there could be some ideas of taking this pawn and unleashing an attack on the black queen. For the time being, the position is equal. Hikaru Nakamura now starts to think, what should he do? He plays b6. He solves the important question of this bishop. It would either go out on b7 or also on e6, attacking this structure. Where should white play the bishop here? He plays his bishop to e3. Interesting move, opening this up and also threatening bishop e4. So if you play bishop a6, there is bishop e4 and white is winning. So that's the reason why Hikaru quickly moves his queen away from this file, and Vantika's next move is fantastic. She plays f3 and she's ready to open up the position for her bishops. There is one weakness in black's camp, and that is the pawn on e6. Not so easy to attack, but always good to keep in mind. The bishop could pop out here and attack it. Bishop a6 played by Hikaru, and his point is, if you take here on e4, I'll take with the pawn, and then you will have tripled pawns on the e file. So that's the reason why Vantika goes b3 and solidifies her structure here. She has played really well until move 16 here against Hikaru and has got a very fine position. But Hikaru is sure to make more important decisions for Vantika to take along the way. He's going to keep on posing her with a lot of questions. He first takes the pawn. Now, important question, do you take with the bishop, the pawn or the rook? All three look fine, but I think taking with the pawn makes a lot of sense, because then you can push the pawn to f4 and connect the pawn chain. So he does take e takes f3, and next move is f4 coming up. And Hikaru now goes queen g6. He's offering a trade of queens here, because after queen takes, h takes, he sees that it's very difficult for Vantika to keep this pawn structure intact, and that's the reason why Vantika keeps the queens on the board. Very interesting decision. She's going for fighting chess. She's kept her queen on c1 and asking Hikaru what's he going to do next. He goes rook d8, and now a very logical move is to play f4, opening up the bishop and also connecting her pawn structure here. Is Vantika going to play f4? Yes, she does. She plays her pawn to f4. The only problem for Vantika is that she's down to 15 minutes on the clock, while Hikaru has 40 minutes. That is a big issue, but otherwise her position is very cool. h5 played by Hikaru. Nice move. He wants to create play here with h4, and Vantika needs to be careful. How is she going to meet this attack by Hikaru Nakamura? She goes bishop h3. Nice move. Look at her just moving that bishop there and angling on that e6 pawn, which we earlier said was a weakness. If Hikaru plays h4, which is the most natural move, and he plays it, white has a very powerful move here, queen b1, because now if queen takes, there is bishop e6 intermediate check, and if the queen moves away, I can go g4. So with that, white would be clearly better, but instead Vantika goes king f2. This is not a good move, because now the white king starts to get a bit exposed, and also putting your king opposite the rook is never a good idea. Vantika could have found queen b1 there, which was a very powerful move, but she couldn't find it because she was low on time. Now after d takes c4, she can take back with b takes c4. But you can sense that Hikaru is slowly taking over in this position. His pieces look better placed. Vantika takes back the pawn, b takes c4, and now c5 seems like a natural idea to play, because with this move, the bishop can then drop back on this long diagonal. That is exactly what Hikaru wants, and he plays his pawn to c5. And with 28 minutes on the clock, Vantika is down to 8 minutes. She has to play 18 more moves against the fastest player on the planet, which is not going to be easy. How does Vantika continue? She goes queen b1 and she offers the trade of queens. This time, Hikaru is not going to take it, because he's not going to be tempted by winning of a pawn here, because bishop e6 check exists as an intermediate move. He goes queen h6, which is a great move, because now if you try to play g4, there is rook takes f4. The king is misplaced on f2. So that's the reason why g4 is not possible, and Vantika, already very low on time, plays queen e4. She has 4 minutes 30 seconds left, and her point is that if you now take on g3, she wants to take back with the king, so that her bishop is no longer hanging there. And Hikaru takes on g3. Now king takes g3. Seems like a decent move. And is Hikaru going to play that? He's taking his time there. Vantika plays king g3, and now there's a very powerful move that Hikaru has, rook f7. Extremely difficult to find, but the idea is to clear this bishop and to bring this bishop down on this long diagonal. Of course, extremely difficult for any human being to find, and so he plays bishop c8. But now Vantika is back in the game. She can go king g2, bring her king back to g2. She does that. She has 2 minutes on the clock, and she has to make 14 more moves, but her position is fine if she can manage to keep her cool. Hikaru goes queen h5, and he's looking at this e2 square. A good idea is to simply trade off the queens with queen f3. Will Vantika find it? It's not easy. She takes on d8. 1 minute 30 seconds left for Vantika, and Hikaru now can take back with the bishop or the rook. Both look fine. He decides to take back with the rook. And now important is to play rook f2 or rook f3. Stop the queen from entering the position. White's position is playable. It's not the prettiest, but it's fine. But instead, Vantika goes all out on the attack with just 18 seconds left. Pushing your pawn to f5 is never a good idea. Hikaru adjusts the pawn, and he knows that it's not a good move. All he has to do is now calculate this to perfection, and he does it. He first gives a check. Now, you can't really move your bishop because your queen would hang. So rook f2 makes sense now as the only move in the position. And Vantika plays it, rook f2. But now, can Hikaru find the next move? Yes, he finds it instantly. Queen to d3. What a beautiful move played by Hikaru. Because now, after queen takes, rook takes, the bishop is hanging. She takes here, and you will realize that if the bishop moves away, I simply give a check here, and the bishop on h3 falls. So that's a huge problem there for Vantika Agrawal. She goes pawn up to f6. And yes, her own bishop is hanging, but there is f takes e7 and a mate here, or a queen is being made. So not to take that, first place bishop takes f6. What a nice move by Hikaru. He calculates this with such precision. If there is one player who manages to convert winning positions with ease, it is Hikaru Nakamura. He does that beautifully, and now there's no time to play fg7 because there's bishop b7 check followed by rook takes h3. And f7 does not help because after king f8 the pawn is going nowhere. So that's the reason why Vantika moves her bishop away to g4 and is trying to hope that her position can survive this. But Hikaru gives a check here. He plays a check, and now of course you can't block because everything would be traded, and the king and pawn endgame is losing. So you have to move the king away. She goes king g1, and now one idea is to give a check. But after a check, there is rook f1, and white is still surviving. So Hikaru plays this classy move, which is bishop a6. And his point is that he may want to give a check and then take the pawn on c4. That's what is his idea. Meanwhile, Vantika tries to defend the c4 pawn with her rook. She is facing trouble from all ends because she is time-wise only has 30 seconds on the clock, and position-wise she is 2 pawns down against Hikaru. This is almost good to resign now, because if she takes on f6, she goes king f2, Hikaru quickly brings her rook back to e5, and if you take on f6, there is bishop takes c4 coming in. So everything is just falling apart now, and yeah, Vantika takes on f6, but Hikaru now chops off the pawn on c4. He's 2 pawns up, and the rest is pretty easy. Let's go in the fast motion and see how Hikaru manages to convert this with ease. And even though the players reach move 40, Hikaru is doing it very easily here. Exchanges the rooks. King comes up, pawn to e5, king goes back. He brings here, pieces get traded. Bishop comes back, now he's pawn up. And you can see that this is quite easily done by Hikaru, using both his pawns to rush down the board. And he's bringing the king from the other end, and Vantika resigns. And with this, Hikaru wins the game. Very interesting game there. Vantika played the first 20 moves quite well. She was matching blow for blow with Hikaru, but in the end, Hikaru showed his class with Queen d3, and I really like the fact how Hikaru actually finds the time to discuss the position with his opponent.